Everybody, this is Josh McKinney, and I just want to welcome you to episode 123 of the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show. So today we are going to talk, this really could be like a two-parter from what we did last week. We did routine last week, we did consistency in training last week, but recovery actually goes hand in hand with consistency. It is hard to stay consistent if you get injured all the time. And really, that is for a lot of people, injury is what causes their decline from doing jiu-jitsu. It's what causes them to quit jiu-jitsu a lot of the time. Maybe it's not as direct. Maybe it's not, I hurt my knee, now I quit. It's probably something more like, I hurt my knee, I need to take 6 weeks off, I need to take 3 months off. And then by the time you get to the end of those 3 months, it is so hard to get back into training. Mentally, you are going to lose to people you never should have. And so it's really hard. It's mentally defeating for that to happen, but it's just a really tough situation. And so I really hope this episode is helpful for you guys that deal with injuries and just give you a few thoughts on what there is when it comes to injury prevention and recovery. And that's pretty much all I have for you guys. Let's go ahead and jump right into this episode. It's safe to say that jiu-jitsu is hard on the body. So I have just a few thoughts for you guys on how to make it less hard on the body, how to make sure that you know how to deal with the minor injuries and make sure that you avoid the very big injuries. Also, how to feel good in training, how to make sure that your training is efficient because physically you are doing the right stuff. And so I think just starting from the top on this episode is really important. When it comes to recovery, when it comes to training, a place that most people don't think about is output. They think about recovery as what I do after class. Of course, recovery is what you do after class. It's what you do before class, but it's also what you do during class. If you have a very idiotic game of jiu-jitsu, if you have a very explosive game of jiu-jitsu, if you have a very power strength-based game of jiu-jitsu, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have to use that. You're going to have to use that strength all the time. And the problem is, if you're training 5 days a week, if you're training 6 days a week, using that much strength, that much physicality every single day, it will get you conditioned to use that physicality, right? Athletes that train like athletes tend to be able to do jiu-jitsu like athletes. But here's the problem. It's when you do this for 2 years and you get a torn ACL and you go, man, it was a really weird situation that I got this torn ACL. It wasn't even a bad situation. Or sometimes people have these no contact injuries that they have. And usually they come from excessive overtraining. I'll give 2 examples of, I guess one was right before it was, I was injured when I got my black belt from this. So it was right before black belt, but let's pretend that they were both right at black belt. 2 lessons that I have learned, 2 examples to give on not taking recovery seriously. One, I've talked about this on the show before. I was rolling with my good friend, Nick Sanders, and I was a brown belt at the time and I was on top, and Nick has a super good guard anyway. And I just wasn't feeling super on in the day. It was just, for whatever reason, I kind of noticed it earlier in the morning, like, man, I'm really beat up. And I said, nah, screw it. I'm just going to go train. And I don't think that would have been a big deal. I think I probably could have gotten away with it because I get away with that kind of stuff all the time. But sometimes when you are really exhausted, you don't react well, and you don't react to certain situations like you normally would. And what happened was Nick and I are rolling and I'm on top, and he did like an overhead sweep to me, something that has happened to me probably throughout jiu-jitsu like hundreds of times. I've been overhead swept a lot, and normally I tuck my chin and I roll right through it. But for whatever reason, I tried to post the hand that wasn't that I didn't have control of. Like I tried to post my right hand, but he still had my sleeve. When I did that, I missed my post, and all of my weight kind of landed on like my shoulder collarbone area. The funny part of the story is I decided I was gonna right after that, I decided I was gonna walk it off. And I was in a lot of pain in my shoulder. And I was like, man, maybe if I just got up and I could actually, I was starting to kind of go in and out of consciousness for whatever reason. I couldn't understand that that was what was happening at the time. But I kind of am like looking at Kyle, my coach, as he's asking me if I want ice. And I remember him saying, I don't remember him actually saying, do you want ice? But I remember him looking at me really weird. And it sounded like he was a mile away from me. And he said, uh, are you not going to answer? And I said, what? And I didn't know what was going on. So oh man, maybe while Kyle's getting the ice, I could just stand up and walk around a little bit. And so then I did. And the next thing that I hear is my friend Junior's voice going, bro, did you pass out? And I'm laying flat on my face. And I was like, nah, I didn't pass out. And so everyone's freaked out. They think I landed on my head. It turned out just landing on my shoulder, got injured. And the excessive swelling in the shoulder joint, sometimes when you try to move it and you're not listening to your body enough, your body's trying to say, hey, this is not good. What it'll do instead when you try to move and you have this injury is it just says, hey, you should go to sleep right now. And that's what happened to me. And then it happened to me again at the doctor's office while I was getting it checked out that night. And same thing, cold sweats, passed out. Yeah, it was a blast. But I really look at that injury and I really think that it could have been avoided by not training as hard that day, or taking off that day, because I was very physically beat down. Second example, also at black belt, this is a few years later, having a super good day of training on a Sunday. If I'm being totally honest with you guys, it would have been probably a year ago. And I have not felt even 80% in the last year of where I was that day. It was literally one of my best days of training ever. And you guys know what I'm talking about. You have these days of training, and the guys that you usually have really close rounds with, you are beating easily. The guys that maybe even can beat you, you are having really close rounds with, or you're beating them. And that was how it felt for me. It felt really, really good. And then what happened was somebody said, at the end of class, like, hey, we're going to be at Kyle's, which is my coach's. Man, all these injuries happen at Kyle's. Shoot, that's actually where I'm going to be on my way as soon as I leave this episode. But I just talking to these guys that were from out of town. They're saying, hey, we're going to be at Kyle's tomorrow if you want to get extra training in. I'm like, man, felt really good today. Probably feel good tomorrow. I wake up the next day. First thought that I have is I should skip training. Literally, I open my eyes and I say, wow, I am so beat down today. I cannot get out of bed today. What do? I don't skip training. I actually go in, force my warm up really hard, actually start to feel good again, start to move around, feeling really good in training. And then something I do all the time, a certain back take I do all the time, I go for it and my rib pops out. And I'll give you guys a forewarning. If you don't want to hear a really horrific injury described, you should hit the little go 30 seconds ahead in the podcast button, maybe twice. But what happened was I inverted. And when I inverted, one of my floating ribs actually came out and went in front of probably all the way up to 3 ribs high, and was stuck there. And then when I started to extend my back, I felt that rib slide down all 3 of the ribs that it was stuck on. And for the next, I want to say it was 18, 19 days, I did not go, but it took 20 days, it took 3 weeks before I went a single day without my rib popping back out like that, popping out in front of my ribs. I could not, people talk about how you can't go to the bathroom when you have rib injuries. I couldn't flush the toilet. Putting pressure on the handle of my toilet would actually cause my rib to pop out. And that was a super, super bad injury. It's literally taken a year. I finally feel like I'm recovered from it. But it's just something I've been battling for a while. And without a doubt, there is no doubt in my mind. Had I have listened to my body more, I would have had a completely different 2021, competitively, physically, mentally, completely different. Not that I regret it at all. I had a great 2021, but it would have been different. I would have physically felt better. And I just didn't listen to my body. And that is a big problem when it comes to recovery is you can do everything right 99% of the time. And then 1% of the time, you make a big mistake. You do something dumb and it causes you a catastrophic injury, an injury that lasts for a year, right? But most of the time, those catastrophic injuries come from excessive overtraining. And this is coming from a guy who's just been on the mat for the last 14 years and has been on the mat with a lot of people. My coaches had a very big school. When I was training at the first school that we were at, there was a ton of MMA fighters who were the kings of excessive overtraining and would get these catastrophic injuries. And so that's where that idea of recovery and stuff started to come from. But the first place to think about recovery is your output. How hard did you go? How hard have you been going? How hard has work been? How hard has the weather been on your body? There are so many factors that beat us down day to day. We're in the middle, towards the end of March now, where I'm at in the Midwest. And you notice for like 2 weeks, injuries, 3 weeks even, injuries go up, sicknesses go way up, and class sizes go down. People complain way more about being tired and being beat up right during this time of year, during the weather change. It's hard on their body, right? So just having a routine, which is what we talked about last week, just having a routine where you say, hey, this routine is perfect for me. I can do it every single week and I'll never get injured. It's not too much. It's the perfect amount of recovery. Guess what? You don't just do jiu-jitsu, right? That's not the only thing in your life. Maybe it is for some people, but I guarantee it's very, very few people who listen to the show. Most people who listen to the show have jobs. They listen to it on their way to work, right? And what happens a lot of times when you are really pressured at work, you go into jiu-jitsu and you say, well, I'm just going to go hard because there's a lot of going on for me. There's a lot of pressure for me or whatever, or you had a bad night's sleep for whatever reason. A lot of times, for whatever reason, we create this thing when we start to get tired that we start to use more energy, we start to use more strength, we start to use more explosiveness. I was explaining it to one of my students last night. We were talking about training twice in the same day. And this is something that I used to do a lot of. I do way, way less of it now, just because the way that my schedule is now, it's better for me physically to do one training one time a day instead of twice. Every once in a while I will, but the reason is when I would train on that second session, no matter who I was training with, I could always tell that I felt slow. I could always tell that I felt, even if it was like a tenth of a second slow. And when you feel that for like literally for years of doing 2-a-days of training, I would just say, okay, well, I'll just force it. I'll just go harder. I'll just fight more. I'll just use more strength. I'll use more speed. And I already don't have that speed to take from. That is the reason that I'm 0.10, whatever seconds slow. I guess 0.1, it wouldn't be 0.10, but 0.1 seconds slower. So I try to make up for it with physicality they actually don't have. And that is a problem. Something that you will find, like if you ever repetitively drill something, maybe for a certain number of reps or a certain time, and you try to do it very quickly, you'll start to find that your mind starts to play a weird trick on you. And it starts to tell you when you start to get tired that you need to physically go harder on the drill. And it's really weird. And I watch, like when we do repetitive drills, I watch my students do it. They start the technique looks flawless in the beginning, and it's perfect and it's perfect and it's perfect. And they start to get tired. And as soon as they start to get tired, the technique looks less flawless and it looks way more forced. If you can focus on being smooth when you are tired, honestly, that is more than doing yoga, more than icing, more than all the other stuff we're going to talk about. If you can learn how to not kill yourself in training, you will be able to do jujitsu so much more, so much longer, and deal with way less injuries, whether small injuries or big injuries. If you learn to control your output, and you can look at this in two ways. I was having a conversation with Andrew Wiltsey. We're talking about the idea of going 100% on something. And he had a really cool statement about it. And he goes, yeah, most people don't even know what 100% of their physicality is. He said, if I had somebody do a rear naked choke on a heavy bag and I said, squeeze it 100%, and then they started squeezing, and then I would say, hey, sink your arm 2 inches deeper into the heavy bag. And he goes, and almost every single person can sink it 2, 3, 4 inches deeper into the heavy bag because they weren't actually going 100%. That is one side of the coin, right? Knowing what 100% is. When you know what 100% is, it's really nice to know what 30% is, because sometimes 30% is all you need. 20% is all you need to get the technique to work. But you normally try to use 100, maybe use 70, right? But that's always your mindset was, I need to add my strength and athleticism to this. And this is not just for recovery. This is also for getting better at jujitsu. When I had Sean Williams on the podcast, he talked about Hodger Gracie, who made sure that he wasn't using his physicality, his strength, his speed, or his athleticism in his technical training before his lead up to his two really big runs at Worlds, when he only had purple belts and under to train with. Is he made sure that when he was training with these purple belts and under, that he wasn't using strength, he wasn't using speed. Not only does this allow him to train way more because he's not beat up physically all the time, it also makes his technique way better. And at any point that he wants to, he's still 210 pounds and super strong. And he could add that strength and athleticism and that speed back to the technique that he already knows flawlessly and he knows worked without strength. Then you add strength to it and it works even better. But you have to be able to manage. You have to be able to say, hey, I'm going too hard here. This isn't something that you will eventually do and then you'll never go too hard. There are times that I will take a week off of training and I will come into my first couple rounds and I will be going with white and blue belts and I will just be gassing myself out. Like, what the heck is going on? Why am I not smooth? Why is nothing working? And then I start to just take a step back and I say, okay, let's start with defense. Let's start with looking for my defense first. And then I start to defend for the first 30 seconds of the next round. And then I go, okay, I'm confident in my defense. I don't need to be excessive with my athleticism, with my strength, my physicality. My technical defense feels really good. Now I'm going to go for an attack. And just making jiu-jitsu less stressful and less, let's go crazy, and just feeling it just for a few seconds, just saying like, okay, I'm safe here. Now I'm going to go into attacking. If you land and your first thought is just go, a lot of times you're going to use physicality. And I know this whole episode has turned into not using too much physicality. So we'll kind of leave the physicality thing at that, and start to look at some actual recovery outside of training. But what is really important for recovery outside of training, more important than outside of training, is what you are doing in your training. And so being really smart about how your body feels, being really in touch with your body and experimenting with stuff, that is going to be important. Because I'm going to talk about some things that have helped me for recovery, but they're only personal, or maybe help some of my students. But still, it's a very small part of things you could be doing. And maybe it's more specific for us and the lifestyle that me and my students have, and less for you. But if there's one thing to take, It is being conscious of how hard you're training. That is the only way you know how much recovery you need, is by looking at what your output was. Um, it's just like it's just like this. When I am done training a session, there are certain times that I will get done with a session, and just from the kind of the shape that I'm in, and just everything, I can kind of feel, man, I'm gonna need at least 2 days off. Uh, Physically, I'm not gonna do nothing those 2 days, but at least 2 days off of hard training of jujitsu. And when I started to get better at that, I stopped having near as many injuries. Like those two injuries that I talked about at black belt, and then a freak foot injury that really wasn't an overtraining injury at brown belt. Those have been my three like only injuries that I've had in the last like 5 years. And I train a ton, and I'm training at a high level. I'm competing at a high level. But those have been the only injuries I've had. And a lot of the time, it just comes from being able to feel out where my body's at. The times that I've ignored it have been the times that I've suffered. So now let's look at some things that you could be doing off the mats that help with recovery. One of the first things is how you spend the 5 minutes before class. I think that is really, really important. Jiu-jitsu is very, very mental. We all know this, right? If it was only physical, there's no way I could have a podcast. If that was all that jiu-jitsu was about physicality, there's just no way I could have a podcast. It is mental. It is about how you think about it. It is about how you look at it. As much as a technique is important, having an understanding of why that technique can be even more important depending on who the person is. And when we are looking at jiu-jitsu class, the 5 minutes before, I talked about some questions in the last episode that you can ask yourself, two before class and then one after class. And it will always improve your jiu-jitsu. And really the only reason that I think that it works well is because it forces you to be intentional. It forces you to say, I think that I want to get better at jiu-jitsu tonight. I think that I am here to get better. And most people don't do that. Most people show up and they step on the mat and they watch the first move and they start drilling, and they drill for 30, 45 minutes. And then they start rolling live, and they may not have had like one thought about why they were there. The coach is showing me I'm here. The coach is showing me what I'm supposed to do. And there's nothing wrong with that some nights. Some nights you have to do that. Some days, some Saturdays, I'm so beat up, and I don't teach on Saturdays. My dad does. I'm super beat up, super exhausted. I will show up to class with a cup of coffee. I'll finish it right before class starts, and I've got about like 10% output for the whole class. I just can notice, like, I just don't have it today, but I can still learn. I can still be around my friends. I can still get better. You need days like that, right? That you are giving yourself a break. I know I'm still talking about mat time and not off the mats yet. We're going to get to off the mats, I swear. But let's look at some things on, first off, let's say you're not recovered. Let's say you were at 0% recovery. You've been super, super fortunate that you have not gotten a catastrophic injury at this point. What should you do from 0% recovery? One of the most important things, we talked about this on the recovery episode, or the routine episode, is what's your big goal? What are you trying to accomplish in jiu-jitsu? And a lot of times your big goal, when you start to break it down, it actually requires recovery. For a black belt, if you're your big goal is black belt, that's where you're trying to get to. Well, black belt is the long game. If you are not recovered, if you're coming in at 0% recovery and trying to get hard training in, you are going to injure yourself. When you're injured, you're going to be off the mats. When you're not on the mats, you are not being consistent. And when you are not being consistent, you are not working towards a black belt. And so, what we have to make sure that we do when it comes to recovery is make sure that it's constant. I honestly, lately anymore, and I think that this is coming from a black belt. I think that this doesn't happen as much when you're a white, you're a blue belt. I don't think you have this option as much. But I like to come in most nights feeling 100% recovered if I'm going to train hard. I honestly, anymore, I don't train hard unless I am 100% recovered, meaning live hard rounds where there's just a lot of variables. So there's a lot of chance of injury. Instead, let's say I'm not at 0%. Let's look at 0% first, actually. Let's say I am at 0%. Where am I going to go from this? Usually 0% recovery to me looks like I have struggled sleeping because I'm just overtrained. And so that really damages recovery. I have trouble with inflammation. My entire body hurts. It is not just, man, my shoulder is hurting, my neck is hurting. Everything hurts. For anyone who has ever been overtrained, you get that. That this has happened, right? And then something else is usually I'm irritable, have a negative outlook on life. Those are going to be your three main things that you can know, like, okay, I'm really struggling with recovery. Maybe you're not even at 0%, but maybe you were just at 50%. Your body's just not functioning well. And the problem is we can learn to operate at 50%. And at least in America, I think 86% of the people who listen to the podcast listen from America, of the United States. And at least in the United States, it is almost encouraged to not get enough rest and to, well, honestly, I wouldn't even say it's encouraged. It is looked down on to get enough rest and to get enough recovery. A lot of times, people who sleep 9 and 10 hours a night are looked at as weak, which is bizarre. If I'm training jiu-jitsu twice in a day, I probably require like 10 and a half or 11 hours of sleep, which is insane. If I'm not training jiu-jitsu, like at all, I'm not physically beating my body down, I require like 7, maybe 8. But when I'm training hard, getting ready for a tournament, I always require like 10 to 11. And like I notice if I get 8 when I'm training really hard, my training starts to suffer, especially after a week of getting 8. And which is like all the sleep you're supposed to need, right? But that is just for the normal person, not the person who is fighting 3 hours every single day. So we have to be smart about how much sleep that we have when it comes to recovery off the mat. In all honesty, sleep is the most important thing. And this is not from me, who has no expertise. This is just what research is starting to tell people. It's crazy. I was talking to one of my friends about this. We know so much about so many different things, or at least we think we do. Like when it comes to science, when it comes to all these other things. And right now, we are doing these scientific studies and it's coming out, and we're making this big discovery that sleep is really important. Like that's where we're at when it comes to the science of sleep. Of course, there's all kinds of cool things they're doing when it comes to the science of sleep, but we are still at the beginning. We are still just finding out how important it is to sleep enough and how much sleep people need. So when it comes to you, if you are used to 5 hours of sleep every night, because there are a lot of Americans that are completely used to, well, I get 5 hours. That's all that I have time for. Maybe other countries too. I'm sure other countries, there are a lot of people that do that too. But try to sleep like 30 extra minutes, literally 30 extra minutes. Go to bed 30 minutes earlier. Start your bedtime routine We were talking about micro routines on the last episode. Start your bedtime routine 30 minutes earlier. What will happen is you will feel better at jujitsu training. You will feel better at work. You'll get less angry at your kids. You will get less angry with your wife. A lot of the time, we suffer from these really bad things in jujitsu in life just because we're not sleeping enough. Just because we're not sleeping enough. And I think that it would be really cool if we could find somebody. I wonder if there is a jujitsu like purple belt, brown belt, black belt that is a sleep expert. That would be really fun to get to interview. So if anybody knows of anybody that is a sleep expert that does jujitsu, that's always important to me on the show that we don't, because like you could find a sleep expert, which would be cool, but you guys could find a sleep expert on Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss with a much better interviewer, and they're probably a higher level expert. So for us, it's important that the person does jujitsu so they can look at it through the jujitsu lens for us. But when it comes to sleep, routine is incredibly important. There are even a lot of studies that say that your morning routine has a big effect on sleeping the next night. That getting sunlight, I talked about this on the last episode, that getting sunlight really early on in your morning will stop your what is it? Does it stop your melatonin absorption? So then your body gets back to making melatonin. And I guess then it would start your serotonin output. That's right, right? That sounds right. I'm not a doctor. So sleep is really important. Finding things that help you sleep. Whether it is your routine, whether it's the temperature of your house, whether it's what you do in the lead up post training, because a lot of us, we do this thing. This is kind of a helpful thing, and I'll have to get back to it really soon. It seems like it's starting to warm up. But I used to have a ton of trouble sleeping after class, and I would always notice that, like, man, I can't stop sweating, at least once it gets to summertime. Can't stop sweating. This sucks. I cannot sleep. And then I had to, at that time, I used to have to wake up really early too. And so I wasn't getting enough sleep. That was like the last time that I really dealt with a lot of different injuries in jiu-jitsu, was when I still had a job and I just wasn't getting to sleep as much. And I mean, I have a job, but it's teaching jiu-jitsu. I had a real person job. But what would happen is I would get these small injuries. I would get sick all the time. And it was just this constant battle. I couldn't figure out what it was. And all of a sudden, one day it stopped. And it was the most bizarre thing. I'm like, man, why don't I have that problem anymore? And what I had added was just one thing. And it was a cold shower each night. Like when it's hot outside. I don't do this in the winter cold shower. I swear to you, in Granite City, Illinois, the water comes out at like -40 degrees Fahrenheit. It's crazy how cold the water gets in the cold water gets in the winter. So I don't do that in the winter, but in the summer, doing a cold shower, what it started to do was cool down my body, and I could fall asleep. Literally one thing after jiu-jitsu, instead of taking a hot shower, I would take a cold one. And it was so interesting. It was like, that sometimes we get this adrenaline rush after training, or endorphin rush after training, but for whatever reason, it puts us in such an exciting mood that we keep using a lot of energy. We had just been fighting for an hour. So we're in this mindset of using a lot of energy. Well, you get home at 8:30 and then you eat dinner, or 8 and you eat dinner. And then by the time you're starting to actually at least mentally cool down, it's like 10 or 10:30. Physically, you might still be warm. You just took a hot shower after training. And then when you go to lay down in bed, it is so hard for, I guess, I think I hear that it's actually more a guy thing, that it's really hard to sleep when it is hot for guys. But I'm sure for some girls too, it's the same. But for certain people, certain temperatures are hard to sleep in. And figuring out how to get your body to the optimal temperature that you fall asleep quickly is incredibly important for recovery. So you have sleep, then you also have diet. Diet is incredibly important for recovery simply because of inflammation. We can look at it from two perspectives. One, if you are overweight and you're training jujitsu, I mean, if you have 40 pounds extra of weight, you put a 40-pound vest on and then try to train jujitsu, it's going to suck. It's going to be super, super hard to do. If you were to lose that weight, you would be able to control your output a lot better. You would also be able to control your inflammation a lot better. That's something you'll see a lot when people go on diets. Early on is, even though they're eating less food, they start to eat cleaner. A lot of times we go on diets, we start to eat more natural stuff that is more nutrition dense because it's what makes you feel good when you cut your calories. And so you start to do that, your inflammation starts to drop excessively. And you will have these guys that go on diets go, man, I feel better than I've ever felt before. I feel like I can move better. I feel like I can whatever better. And what does that do? That helps with recovery because your inflammation is lower. And it also helps with output. It helps you not beat your body up, not to mention the fact how hard it is on your joints to have excess weight, especially while we're doing jujitsu, and we're knee cut passing. If you have 30, 40 extra pounds on a knee cut pass, that is a lot more pressure on your joint. Those are going to be two things, is sleep and your diet. The third thing for recovery is your exercise. We're going to look at this from two perspectives. So for some people, they struggle because they maybe they don't feel like they're strong enough. They don't feel like they're explosive enough. They don't, whatever. They just feel like physicality is the problem that needs solved for their jiu-jitsu. First of all, I would say until purple belt, at least, it's not the problem you need solved for your jiu-jitsu. If you're a brand new white belt and you think that, like, man, if I could just be stronger, I would be able to beat everybody. Most likely it's not. Most likely you still aren't aware yet of where strength is being used and where people are just more technical than you and have better understanding than you. Sometimes it is like that. Sometimes you are outweighed by 40 or 50 pounds by everybody in your gym. That's different, right? But usually people that like, well, I'm not strong enough. I got to go to the gym. A lot of times what starts happening is you only have a certain amount of recovery. You only have a certain amount of free time, and they spend it at the gym. They spend it lifting weights. And the problem with that is if you keep lifting weights and okay, maybe you gain 5-10 pounds of muscle over the course of a year. For most people that are natural athletes, that's really good. It's still not going to make a difference if you don't have a better understanding of jiu-jitsu. There are still going to be 14-year-old kids that are beating you down that are weaker than you, but they just have a better understanding of jiu-jitsu. They've just been on the mat more. So when it comes to exercise, first off, excessive exercise that causes you to miss training or it causes you injury is something to avoid. People that work out for really long periods of time. And this is something, if you guys want more information on, some of the episodes I've done with my dad have been on things like this, on weightlifting and things like this. Most of the time, people dig into their recovery so much during their weightlifting routine or whatever their exercise routine is. They dig into their recovery so much by the time that they go to jiu-jitsu, they're never really seeing big gains from their weightlifting anyway. And they're too beat up to train jiu-jitsu effectively. They're too exhausted. And so they don't get a good session in, and they've also beaten up their body even more, dug into their recovery even more. And then they do this all the time. That's a problem. Keep in mind, I think you should lift weights. This is the other part of exercise. And for me, this is what works for me. And maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. But I like to do yoga twice a week and lift weights once a week. And then I also do like to do some form of bike sprint or regular sprint, like on grass. That's something not hard on my joints. do that like once a week too, especially when it's time to start to get in competition shape. All this every once in a while, it's twice a week. But we'll just look at all those things. So for our workout, we do a 20, maybe 20-minute high intensive full body workout once a week. I have done this. I mean, I've gone up to 3 times a week and bounced around from that. But I've worked out like this since I was 7 years old. And man, even at medium heavyweight, where I've been pretty undersized and I am natural, very, very, very few times have I ever grappled with somebody and, oh my gosh, this guy's stronger than me. Almost always I grapple and go, man, I feel stronger than this guy. Hey everybody, Josh here again. I just wanted to interrupt this episode and tell you about something really exciting that we have going on at simplifyingjujitsu.com. And that is my most recent instructional, Mastering the Duck Guard. We are giving this instructional away for 40% off. Honestly, the amount of content that you get for this for the price is ridiculous. Basically, what Duck Guard is a systemized version of cross sleeve. I took one grip from bottom and I said, I want to learn everything there is about this single grip. And it produced some different guards. It produced some new things I don't think anyone had ever seen before. And it produced a really simple system because you don't have to grip fight as much. You are not having to constantly switch grips from your guard, which for a lot of us is when our guard gets passed. And so for this entire month, the entire month of April, I guess, how many days are there in April? Like 30? That sounds right. Let's say at the end of April 30th, it will not be on sale again, and it probably won't be on sale for the rest of the year again. It's never been on sale for 40% off. So this is for sure the cheapest you will ever be able to get Mastering the Duck Guard. So check it out, man. Just go to simplifyingjujitsu.com/quack. That is simplifyingjujitsu.com/QUACK. And get 40% off Mastering the Duck Guard. Hope to see you guys there. And that is what I do for weightlifting. For yoga, flexibility. It doesn't have to be yoga per se, but flexibility training outside of jiu-jitsu is incredibly important. Jiu-jitsu causes a lot of muscular imbalances. It causes a crazy amount of muscular imbalances. Pretty much anybody who's done jiu-jitsu for any amount of time has golf or tennis elbow or has dealt with it. And that is generally due to being really strong, gripping a certain way, and doing it a lot. Basically, one side of your forearm gets way too strong for the other side, and it causes muscular imbalance. It causes injury. It also gets too tight. Simple things like stretching your feet, stretching your hands, stretching your shoulders, stretching your hips, and then probably upper back, lower back for most people, neck, whole spine thing. If you did that once a week, you would stop having most jiu-jitsu injuries as long as you're getting enough sleep, as long as you're managing your output well. But I would say I've almost kind of went in order of importance, in my opinion, when it comes to being recovered. First is your output. Next is your sleep. And then is your diet. And then is your exercise, right? Most people aren't getting injured because of lack of exercise. But sometimes we're just training so much, we get these muscular imbalances. We get these things that we're really, really not flexible in. And then we're probably pretty flexible everywhere else. And so that place that isn't flexible causes an injury. It causes me to be excessive about how I'm doing something. Actually, with my rib injury, like I said, I dealt with it for a year, which is way too long to deal with a rib injury. One, I wasn't listening to my body very well. I was training through it way too much. Two, I found out more recently that I had some certain muscular imbalances, kind of like in my core, in my hips, and even in my lats. And so, or super tight things like that. So I started to just take rolling out a little more seriously and kind of mixing that with my flexibility training, using like rollers, using tennis balls, using whatever you can to try to loosen some of these things that are causing injury. The only way you can know what is causing injury is by trying to study it on your own or knowing somebody that has. Um, so for us, when we're going into like the idea of whether you're getting massage or whether you're doing it yourself, knowing where you're normally tight and then trying to make connections. So saying, man, my chest is always really tight. And so you start to stretch your chest more and you start to roll out your chest even at some times. And you start to go, man, I wonder if that excessive tightness in my chest is what is causing what caused my rotator cuff tear. Oftentimes it is. Your rotator cuff's too weak, your chest is too strong, and it's too tight. And so only you can find those things though, right? It comes from knowing your body. If there's anything to take away as a whole, like if there was a general concept of what this episode is about, it is about being aware. That is all recovery really is being aware and then listening to yourself too. Because that's tough. There have been times that a lot of times that I've known that I'm not physically capable of training hard, but still try to do it. And now I'll give you guys just a few thoughts on, I guess we'll go back to mat time, but a few thoughts on what if that is happening to you? What if you are beat up, but you still need to get better at jujitsu? Just give you a few things you can do. First of all, you can always try to just be inspired in training. That is one of the hardest things for most people is find something that excites them in jujitsu to focus on. You can watch competition footage to do that. A lot of times I like, and I found that I liked this way more while I was injured. Almost like every class that I normally teach, I train with, but the last year I haven't been able to. And so it's caused me to sit and watch a lot of classes. And even not watching my black belts, even watching my blue belts, even watching some of my white belts. Not that I see a move and I go, oh my gosh, I need to do that move. I should learn it from this guy. Usually what happens is I see the way that they approach something. And it's just a little different. And I go, oh man, that's inspiring. That was interesting. I should try something like that. I should try, and you can get inspired while you're injured. You can get inspired while you're beat up. That is something to always, that's usually my go-to. If I'm beat up, okay, I'm working my mind. I am working my brain. I don't want to push my body unless I have a tournament coming up. I might have a little bit different of a mentality. I just haven't, right? So being able to do that is going to be important. Coming in and focusing on getting your repetition. We talked about it last week. One of the most important things for getting good at anything is repetition. You have to do it a bunch of times. So whatever position you're focused on, whatever idea you're focused on, you can come in and simply deadpan drill it, meaning like your opponent gives you no resistance and you're just doing it over and over, right? Or you could do it with a percentage. You can do designated winner. There are all kinds of different games. Some of you guys probably don't know what designated winner is. Now that I think about it, we've only ever done it as a Suck Less Saturday episode, but don't worry. I'll tell you guys all about it in the upcoming book, The Three Lenses, which will be out May 1st, I think, or whatever the first Thursday is in May. That is, I think, confidently where that is going to come out, the day that it'll come out. And when it comes out, you guys will know. You'll be pumped about it. But yeah, that's what I was thinking about recovery. That was what I was thinking about rest. And so I guess I'll leave you guys with one last little thought, right? So you can get your repetition, you can get your mental training in. But sometimes you actually should just take the night off. Sometimes you should just take the night off. A lot of times, overtraining creates mental loops. And generally, like I said, they're generally negative. They are generally negative mental loops because you're just feeling a certain way. So when you're feeling a specific way, a lot of times your body, your mind tells you nobody else understands. Nobody else gets where I'm coming from. That's normal. That happens a lot. And so one of the best things to do in that is to miss jujitsu a little bit, is to take 2 days off, is to take 3 days off and wait until you're like, man, I need to get back on the mats. I'm dying without being on the mats. That means you're probably going to be recovered, right? But you need to take days off sometimes. And as important as a routine is, sometimes you're doing great on your routine, and it is more important to interrupt it a little bit and take an entire day off. And that is kind of what I will leave you guys with. Remember, this is all just, this episode was pretty random, but it was also all just about how I recover and how I feel better and how I have found ways to train. You guys can apply so many different thoughts to this, so many different ideas to being recovered. But the main thoughts are going to be, what is your output? How much sleep are you getting? And then you go to your diet and exercise, and just being aware of your body is the main goal. And it's a skill. The more that you do it, the more you focus on understanding your body and being in tune with your body, the more you can know, man, if I eat that pizza tonight, I am not going to feel good at training tomorrow, right? Or whatever it is that you may eat, or whatever it is that, or if I stay up too late tonight, I will not get good training tomorrow. And so knowing that, or at least I won't feel good in training tomorrow, knowing that is incredibly important. And that's what I'll leave you guys with. Hope you guys like this one. And that is the episode. I could have went longer. I could have dug more in. But to be honest, I needed to recover. I am just about to leave for ADCC trials / PANS. I'm a coach for both of those and not a competitor, which is a weird feeling. Normally when I travel to compete or to a tournament, I travel to compete. And this time I am not doing that. I am traveling to be a coach, and it's a completely different vibe. It's a completely different nervousness. You don't really have control of what is going to happen. Not that you do when you are a competitor, but at least you feel like you do. And, but I know it's going to be an exciting bit of time. I know it's going to be an exciting week, honestly, that I'm going to be gone at ADCC trials and PANS. And what I want to do during that week is I want to learn more. I want to make better connections, and then come back to the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show a week from whenever I leave with a better network, more people to interview, and with more knowledge of jiu-jitsu. That is something that I love about these types of tournaments and these types of big events, is by sitting and watching 10-12 hours of jiu-jitsu every single day. For some reason, it makes me better at jiu-jitsu. It helps me understand jiu-jitsu more. A lot of people loved the blitzing, the prevent episodes, the episodes that I did that really were putting definition on things that we all are aware of in jiu-jitsu, but maybe there isn't a definitive word for it or a definitive idea around it. And that all came when I was at Worlds. Like, that was when I started to discover and decide, like, hey, we need names for these things. We need definition for these things. If you guys haven't heard the 2-part episode on pacing, I think that those are 2 of the best solo episodes that I've ever done on the show. And so you guys should absolutely check those out. But what's cool about doing these tournaments, I should come back with some really cool ideas and some new thoughts on the podcast. But what is even more exciting is when I come back, it is going to be full force on actually the ebook is finished. The 3 lenses is completely done, but it is going to be full forced on a secret project that you guys don't know about, and a video project that you guys know some about. And so it's a lot of excitement coming up in the month of April. Make sure that you are buying Mastering the Duck Guard, because, well, shoot, I might not have money to get back home from Florida after, being in Vegas and then Orlando so long. Make sure you're purchasing that so I can get back to the podcast and actually record for you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Hope this one was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions or any other thoughts on recovery, you should let me know at josh@simplifyingjujitsu.com. send me an email, or you can message me on Instagram at the Josh McKinney. I get more messages on Instagram lately, and it's harder to keep up with them. The emails are a lot easier to keep up with because I sit and go through all of them in a row. So if you guys are messaging me on the gram and I'm not responding, it is probably not because I hate you. It's probably just because I'm busy. So if that's the case, I don't know, email me. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope this episode was good for you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope that you guys can start recovering better. I hope that you stop dealing with as many injuries that you have dealt with. And I hope today's episode helps you suck just a little bit less at jiu-jitsu. Have a great day, guys.